I said it before and I'll say it again. Life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Never fear change. Life is too short for fear. Chase what is desired.
I can do this all day.
Would you mind identifying what you are?
We're the best friends squad.
That's what we call ourselves. Sort of like a team.
Welcome to the rodeo. Ladies and gentlemen, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride.
This is the way.
I have spoken.
Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanny Show Torture Cinema.
Sean, Alex, and Paul in the Wild Wild West.
Oh, man. I'm going to have so much fun when I start singing the song later.
This is why I wanted you to stop singing before the podcast, because that was like, you're ruining my tagline. Stop it.
Wiki Wild, Wiki Wild, 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 Wild West. Jim West, Desperado. Yeah. Anyway, I'm Sean.
I'm Paul.
I'm Alex.
And we're here for a very special pandemic edition of Torture Cinema, voted on by the general public. You all picked Wild Wild West, so thank you so much.
Thanks for this trip back to the 90s. Place I ever wanted to go back to. High school days, yeah. Woo!
It was a trip, all right.
Yeah, I remember the 90s, because I was in high school in the 90s.
Yeah, I graduated in 98.
Oh, little baby you.
I graduated in 2001, and I very much remember the homophobia of the 90s.
But we'll get to that.
Oh, yeah.
As always, we need to talk about what we're drinking before we get into a synopsis about this film. And so I'm going to jump to Paul. Paul, what delicious, appropriate 19th century drink are you drinking?
A Bundaberg root beer. Australian-made, family-owned.
That is very appropriate.
Is it? It's from the 19th century?
I mean, the only way you could get more appropriate than a root beer for the 19th century is if he was drinking a sarsaparilla.
Oh,
indeed.
That would be so southern.
That would be very southern, but I'm not a fan of sarsaparilla. But root beer, on the other hand, as listeners know, I drink. That
is Paul's go-to drink. So,
and they had some left over at the store in the epidemic, so I bought myself a 4-pack.
In the epidemic section? What?
No, during this epidemic.
When it was still an epidemic. Got it. Okay. Let's jump over to you, Alex. What are you drinking?
So, I have returned to my old standard from when I was working as a field tech, where I would have my thermos tea with raspberry amaretto in it. And so instead of thermos tea, it's actually just fresh tea that I made, which I don't know if that's superior or not, but it's boozy black milky tea.
I'm not sure we'd see that in a southern bar in the 1880s or in Utah, but you do what's good for you.
Exactly. It's what I had available, because I'm not leaving the house right now.
I do declare that we must find the best drinks in this day and age.
I mean, I could have made a gin and tonic, except I hate tonics, so you do what you can.
Well, great. That sounds delicious, Alex.
It is.
So as for me, I'm going to be messed up on this podcast. I'm just warning you all, because I've already finished a very full glass of port. And I am now on my second glass of port. I have been drinking a Taylor port. Very classic. I kind of wanted to go for something that would fit a little bit with the period, which is that port was often drunk on ships. And there is, in fact, a ship in this story, a mechanized ship of sorts. And port was, well, it's a Portuguese thing, but, other people drank port. And so the first one was a Taylor port. I can't remember which specific one, but now I am drinking a Founder's Reserve Porto by Sandeman. And they are both very different ports. The Taylor was very sweet, a little tangy, very nice. The Founder's Reserve is, it's got a lot more of a full body. It's still got the sweetness, but it's a lot more tart. And I have been really getting into the ports, y'all, because I hate wine, but for some reason I can down a bottle of port.
So you're heading left, i.e. to say hard to port?
No! Don't do that to us, Paul. Yes, I am going hard to port.
Sorry.
I love you, Paul.
I was just thinking I could go get a shot of whiskey.
Ooh, whiskey is good.
Whiskey is always the answer. The Irish taught me that. I learned that. The one thing I learned at Dublin Worldcon.
Well, you learned other things which were not so great, but that's the positive thing you learned at Dublin Worldcon.
Well, perfect. So I guess that's time for us to switch over to whoever has will volunteer themselves for the glorious and most esteemed role of explaining what this movie is about, because we are, again, watching and discussing the 1999 steampunk western action comedy, Wild Wild West, based, and I say use the word based with very big quotation marks, based on the television show of the same name, which I think would be fair, does not bear much resemblance. But who would like to explain what this movie is about?
You can't tell, but I'm resolutely not making eye contact with you. Like a recalcitrant student.
Sean, I think you should explain this.
Yeah, because I cannot fucking explain this movie, and I watched it only like 3 hours ago.
All right, well, you look, I'm a little bit messed up at this point, so I got y'all. I got you. So, Wild Wild West is a film that stars primarily Will Smith and Kevin Kline, with Kenneth Branagh as our villain, Dr. Arliss Lovelace. It is a story about two members of the post-Civil War United States government who serve very similar roles. Jim West, played by Will Smith, is your sort of brash, sort of, I guess, kind of a James Bond without as much alcohol, much more suave sort of figure who sort of infiltrates Civil War groups and tries to fuck up their day. And he's desperately trying to kill a character's name who I've forgotten, except that
General McGrath.
Bloodbath McGrath, played by Ted Levine. Brilliantly played by Ted Levine, because I didn't even know it was him. Every time I see this movie, I forget that it's him, who is primarily known for the fact that he has a thing in his ear, which I think mostly is just used to drain the goop that comes out of his head. Anyway, so Jim West is trying to deal with that. He's trying to kill that guy and deal with that whole thing and stop some sort of evil plot. And Kevin Kline is a sort of kooky, comedic genius who uses lots of tech gadgets and disguises and things. And eventually the two sort of butt heads at one point and end up being forced together by President Ulysses S. Grant to work together on a super cool train which is run by the guy from Tim Allen's show Home Improvement, who played the dad of his wife, whose name I can never remember, but he's also in Blade Runner, so you know who exactly I'm talking about. Anyway, so they get put together because they need to stop this guy, Dr. Arliss Lovelace, who is a Civil War veteran, I guess.
Yeah, Confederate soldier, yeah.
Yeah, he got blown up, so he's lost much of his lower body. He's basically down, belly button down is gone.
Including 35 feet of his lower intestine, as he says at one point.
Sure, we can certainly haggle over exactly how many feet are exactly lost. That was probably going to require a congressional inquiry. But the point is, right, he is this, he's a wheelchair-using guy with a great beard, played by Kenneth Branagh.
The beard is amazing. It's like the best
It is
thing.
pretty great. But anyway, so he turns out to have a plot which involves many techno gadgets and also many women who are very attractive and work for him and wear, I'm not sure exactly what you would call, like sort of 19th century Victorian sexy, I guess.
Quasi-fetish wear.
I mean, they're basically Wild West whores, except for the part where they're wearing these gray jackets that have like spider web over the tits.
So it's sort of confusing. But anyway, he's got this like army of women and men with various mechanical inclusions on their bodies. Presumably they are also Civil War vets who have lost parts of themselves as a consequence of battle, and those have been replaced by mechanical things. Anyway, so Lovelace is a genius, and he's got this big plot where he wants to create a giant mechanical spider and, I guess, kidnap Ulysses S. Grant and then convince the U.S. to, I guess, surrender.
Forcibly balkanize.
Yeah, and then he wants to cut up the United States into a bunch of pieces and give them to the various empires that still exist at this point, including the British, the Spanish, I believe the Dutch are there, and the French. Who knows? Like, they don't ever get any lines, but they're Anyway, so that's his big plan, and then Kevin Kline and Will Smith have to stop them, but they have to like learn to work together and actually like each other, even though they're like very much opposite. There's also a lovely scene where Kevin Kline and Will Smith exchange breast grabs, which I think was a very appropriate scene for this film, and certainly gives you a sense of the quality and importance of the comedy of this film. You know, I will just say to everybody at home, you know, if you have a preferably male friend and you are also male, feeling one another's breast is a really good way to connect. And I think that basically sums up what the movie is. There's other stuff that we'll get to, but I didn't want to throw it out there because I suspect there are things that we're going to talk about at much length.
I appreciate you letting me in on sort of the social rituals of cis men, because it's been very mysterious to me.
Glad that we could provide the service to let you know what we really secretly do.
But I will say that having many friends who are cishet straight men, only some of them seem kind of okay with male affection, which to me I find deeply amusing because I'm kind of like, fuck it, like, let's hold hands, I don't even give a shit. But a lot of cishet straight men like can't have me be gay, and I'm like, well, why not? It's kind of fun.
I mean, it is very fun. We just don't we don't tell the straights that, because then everyone would want to be gay.
That's true. It's a secret that all the gay people hold for themselves. You're so selfish, Alex.
If only we'd told you years ago.
We would all be gay, and this world would be a better place. I think I'm at the point where I'm definitely messed up. So we should go to our likes and dislikes, as I think we got the plot of this movie down. Well, go ahead, Paul.
Okay, so I'll take an easy like, which gives you guys the rest of the movie in order to find something you like. I like the opening credits, and they're stylish, they're interesting, they're good visuals. For a little while watching it, I was like, well, maybe this won't be as bad as I have heard, because for years, I've never seen this movie before. I've just heard the Will Smith song. And I also knew, I remember an interview, or at least a piece from, I think it was Robert Conrad, one of the stars of the original Wild Wild West show, saying that he was upset that Kenneth Branagh got to play Dr. Lovelace because he thought that a small person should play the role, not Kenneth Branagh.
Ooh.
That's the only things I ever knew about this movie. A, the song, and B, Robert Conrad going off on this movie. And I never got to see it till now. So I'm so opening credits, like, okay, this could be fine. It's got a nice sense of style. It's got a nice sense of its own aesthetic. And so for a couple of minutes at the beginning, I thought, okay, maybe this won't be the trash fire that it is probably going to be. And then, then the movie started, and that I was just abused of that notion in rapid order. But I did like the opening credits. Very colorful.
Yeah.
Yeah, very colorful.
They were retro in a cool way. Because I feel like even in the 90s, they were kind of retro.
And they're going for that retro sort of like steampunky, throwing back to the original series, throwing back to the 19th century sort of thing. Like, oh, I can get what they're going for here. They're going for an aesthetic, and they're hitting the mark.
I think it's a good like.
Without any snark.
So I do have a question about this, and it was something I was thinking about, which is, when did like steampunk really sort of take off, at least in the United States? I can't speak to anywhere else.
In the 90s.
In the 90s, is that really like the point? So that kind of explains this movie, is what you're saying?
The William Gibson's The Difference Engine, K.W. Jeter's novels. 90s is when steampunk really started to happen as a thing. So by 99, it was enough in the consciousness that, yeah, they could make a movie making it. While the general public wouldn't have recognized it as steampunk at the time, anybody in science fiction who watched it in 1999 was like, oh, that's steampunk. Got it.
Okay, so it probably had not yet had the penetration into the broader public consciousness.
Not yet. No.
Well, anyway, thank you, Paul. I was just very curious, and so I guess we'll jump to Alex now. Alex, what like do you have?
I mean, I do believe that Kenneth Branagh's facial hair in this movie is very like-worthy, but what I actually liked is a little more kind of part of the narrative, because I did actually appreciate that the movie really depicts the former Rebs as just giant racist pieces of shit. And there's no like lost cause narrative or like, oh, but it was complicated and there's some nobility here. They're like, no, they're straight up just fucking racist ass pieces of shit. And I appreciated that. And kind of like along with that, I do not feel qualified to comment particularly on the way race is dealt with in the movie, though I feel like it was actually not terrible. But again, that's from my perspective as a white person, so who knows? But I like that, there was not a lot of meaty emotional stuff in this movie. The one, like, character emotional moment you get is finding out Will Smith's character, Jim West's backstory. And I also, where on one hand you're like, oh God, we fridged an entire town of black people so that, he can have like a sad backstory. On the other hand, I think that you still don't get a lot of characters like him who get to have that, like, I'm out there to get revenge on my people and I had a complicated childhood and all of that, where normally, like the sad male protagonist is like the white guy with a certain chin structure. So I liked that as well, is that West kind of had the best emotional reasoning for anything he was doing and why he was the way he was, and he had a really good backstory.
Well, I think what's interesting about that too is that part of his backstory that I don't think we've said, which is that he had a family, obviously, who were of African descent, and then he lost all of them, and he was raised by Native Americans.
It wasn't that he lost them. He got sold to a different plantation, and then he escaped.
Sorry.
So, like, he was a formerly enslaved person who, it sounds like he was really young when he did escape, and then he was raised by Native Americans in the deserts, which is how he knows so much about things. And then it sounds like he found out that his family had managed to escape and go to that town. Oh God, I can't remember the name of the town now, in Illinois. And when he had gone back there to find them and be reunited with them, it was like, oh, hi, Lovelace is a giant piece of shit and murdered everyone in the town to test out one of his war machines because he's a Southerner who doesn't think they're human.
You do see for versions of this in a lot of westerns where it's usually, as you said before, like it's usually a white man who's like, he's raised by the Injuns, and I'm putting quotations around that because this film does use the word Indians, which would have been period appropriate for the time. So that, I think it's interesting that this film tries to subvert that a little bit in the sense that it is an African descended man, an African American man who is having that story, which in a lot of westerns
is actually more accurate.
Yeah, which may actually be quite more accurate. Yeah. It's a thing you don't see a lot in westerns because westerns are, at least historically, very much white-centric. Mm-hmm. If any other people of color appear, they're either like servants or they're like the noble savage stereotype, like where you get like Tonto and things like that, where it's sort of like he's friendly with the white man, but he speaks funny and he is like noble, but he's also savage and he has weird ways, and so you see them as contrast. In this, we don't get that because Jim West is presented as, he's rough around the edges, I guess, in a way, but he's effectively like an American. He's just more of a classical American in the sense that he's very gung-ho and go get 'em. And Klein is actually in some ways the weird one because he's the one playing with all the gadgets and doing disguises and transgressing gender stereotypes in his own unique weird way. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how my feeling was of it.
Well, and I was going to say the classic Western trope for the white man who gets raised by Native Americans and thus knows their way and then has a Native American friend who is his helper. I mean, the classic trope on that is settler family who gets mostly murdered by either a different tribe of Native Americans, and then the kid gets rescued by the good natives, or, Native Americans murdered most of your family and then are like, oh, you're a young kid and I feel bad, so we'll raise you. But that's like the classic thing. So even just having that twist on it where Jim West basically gets taken in because he's escaping the horrible white people is quite refreshing.
And it's also historical. I mean, there were a lot of escaped slaves who wound up getting into Native American communities, especially in Oklahoma and Texas during the 1850s and 60s. So he's actually part of a tradition of something that actually really happened, which is like, I bet 9 out of 10 viewers in the movie had no idea that. They just think, oh yeah, it's a cute backstory for Jim, but that's actually a thing that happened to a large extent.
So to throw something out that's a piece of interesting backstory, Kevin Kline gave an interview, I don't know exactly when, I think the 2000s some point, where he talked about this movie, and what was interesting is that he seemed to suggest that the studios at that time expected blockbusters to be effectively stupid, in the sense that their characters had to be very simplistic and one-dimensional, both good and bad characters, and that you weren't supposed to have a lot of complexity. And so one of the complaints while they were making the film was, can you dumb down these characters? Can you take out some of the complexity? And what I think is interesting is they probably did dumb down quite a lot, because things are presented to us, but they're not explored all that much. They're given to us in story, and we get pieces of it. We don't necessarily get as much of it. But yet this film does try to keep some of that in. So some of that is in Jim West's character, and some of that is attempts in providing Artemus Gordon, played by Kevin Kline, his character some complexity and his unique way of approaching things. But there is a sense that in the 90s, at least according to Kevin Kline, that the perception was that if it's a blockbuster film, you reduce the complexity down. You take that out and you make it more about the gosh wow and the explosion and the excitement, and less about the character depth, which I think is so interesting because they still snuck some of that in here in what is in Alex is Like. And while they didn't explore it maybe in the depth that we might appreciate now, it's still kind of there and does offer a lot of sort of fruit for thought.
I mean, there is like, it feels like there is one scene where I was like, this one scene I could see if this movie was made today, this one scene would still be there. And that's when Jim tells Artemis about his background, and you can tell they actually have like this moment of real emotional connection that, you know, like Kevin Kline and Will Smith did an amazing job in that scene. And it makes me so sad that basically they spent the rest of the time being a giant gay joke. But like that one scene where they're kind of like sitting at the fire and being like, oh, this is what Jim's deal is. And Artemis being like, oh, okay, I get you. I'm sorry. I'm going to help you get this guy. Like that was a really great scene. And again, like I could see a scene like that being, if the movie was made today. I think if it was made today, it would also be a very different movie.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's not one of my likes, but I wish they had done more with the exploration of their relationship to one another and sort of explored it with more depth. Because I actually really like that. And so in the original Wild Wild West, there was less animosity between the two characters, as my understanding. I've never actually watched it, but I've read a lot about it. I've
seen some episodes. They're much more like a teasing's not the right, much more friendly sort of like playfulness between the two characters, even though they are oil and water, but they're not actively antagonistic. They know they're a team and they work as a team, even if they think the other one is, just shaking heads.
I guess I'll jump to my like then, so we can eventually get to our dislikes. And my like's actually pretty simple. I actually kind of like this movie, but we'll get to in my dislikes why I don't like this movie. But there's just a lot of like aesthetic things that I really like. But the one thing I think I appreciate the most about this movie is that even though his character is incredibly problematic, and I will come back to it later, Kenneth Branagh's Dr. Arliss Lovelace, like his commitment to the character he's playing.
Lovelace, not Lovelace.
Yes.
He is pretty incredible. Like, the fact is, like, Kenneth Branagh, like, melds into Lovelace. Like, he becomes Lovelace in a way that there's just a thing about his performance that I just find so really incredible that I watch him and I forget it's Kenneth Branagh. And, like, that to me is like the pinnacle of acting, when I forget that there's an actor there, that there's a person that has a different personality from the character they're playing. And Lovelace, he just dedicates himself to it in such an incredible way. And in a way, I think he's having fun with the character, which is problematic in some ways, but is also kind of, I guess, and that sort of shows on the screen, which to me I think matters a lot, because this is supposed to be a fun movie. It's supposed to be an action comedy. It's supposed to be fun and adventure and like people punching each other and running around, and there's comedy and funny bits and silliness and funny tech. And so in a way, I really enjoyed Kenneth Branagh here, because I think he dedicates himself to this role in remarkable ways, given that this is meant to be a blockbuster that's supposed to be sort of not quote-unquote high-level acting, even though I disagree with that intent, but you get the idea. So that's my really, is I just love his dedication to this role, that he melds into it and becomes Loveless for all his racism and other problematic aspects.
As repellent as he is as a character, as we find out the things he's done and just the lengths he's going and what his plan is, he owns this character in a very real and visceral way. And I mean, it's hard to read actor intent in a movie, but it seems like he's having fun playing Loveless and just having a blast with, especially when at the one point where he gets out of the wheelchair and he has the spider legs and he's like coming to smash Will Smith. He's like it looks like he's having an absolute ball with this character that's chewing up scenery with a little plum and gusto, and the pathos and the strength of the scene where they're both hanging over the edge, and he's taunting Will Smith as like, oh, you don't have the guts to pull that lever and kill us both. It's like,
you're yellow.
Yeah, yella. It's like he's really owning it. And I did appreciate him and how he actually approaches the character and goes for it.
I mean, I have loved Kenneth Branagh ever since I saw him in Henry V. And, let there never be any doubt that man can chew up the scenery, right up there with like some of the other Shakespearean greats like Derek Jacobi. Like,
yeah,
they know when there's the time to be like austere and very British, and then they know there's the time to like sharpen their teeth and gnaw on all of the props. And I mean, that's why I fucking loved the new Murder on the Orient Express. Like, I mean, he is a man who knows how to play melodrama and has so much fun with it when he's not doing like a serious role. And
yeah,
he just does it with such gusto. that is why I love Kenneth Branagh no matter what. I will always love him forever.
I wonder if this movie is meant to be the start of a franchise.
Oh, I'm sure it was.
Because there's the scene at the end where President Grant, he makes them the first members of the
Secret Service.
And then he gives them a piece of paper. Here's your first assignment, and it's like, and then they're going off in the sunset at the end, and the Spire's like, okay, so I think we're going for a franchise here that didn't work for reasons I will discuss why, but it looked like they were trying to start a tentpole and start a series with these two characters, and it didn't.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I do believe it ate shit pretty badly in the box office.
Well, it did about $222 million in its box office on a budget of $170. Even in the 90s,
which is
that's not good, because you're expecting at least double of the budget amount, probably close to triple. This is the 90s, so I don't know exactly how the math maps up.
Well, and plus considering they advertised the ever-loving shit out of it, because I remember, like, the fast food promos and all that.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, this was advertised quite a lot, because this was in the height of Will Smith. Because the 90s were like the Will Smith era. He did the Men in Black film, and like it was big, and even Will Smith has talked about this.
Yeah.
Yep, Independence Day.
But yeah, so this film certainly is a flop. It did not make enough money at all.
I have to read this bit from the Wikipedia page. Robert Conrad, who played Jim West in the original television series, arrived at the 20th Golden Raspberry ceremony in order to collect in person 3 Razzies the film won in order to express his objections to the film.
Yeah, because it was nominated for 8 total Razzies that year. It won 5. 3 of them for Worst Picture and Worst Original Song. I will argue, though, that Worst Original Song, I disagree.
That's a bit unfair.
That's a bit unfair.
That's not a fair cop.
It's a silly song, but it's Will Smith and it's fun. All right, Paul. Dislike. Give us your dislike.
I think I'm going to leave the two of you the juicy ones. I'm going to take a T-ball and leave you the juicy ones to tear apart as you like. So we didn't actually talk about it, but it's only in the negative space of it. One thing I didn't like about this movie is that we do get a good sense of Jim West and who he is, where he came from, his tragic backstory. We get all that. We get a nice complete arc of who he is, what he's doing, why he's doing it. Everything makes sense. Who the fuck is Artemis Gordon and why should we care about him?
Thank you.
I mean, yes, he's an inventor. He cross-dresses apparently as part of all his Masters of Disguise. But where did he come from? How did he get it working for the government? And I like Kevin Kline as an actor, but the guy's a cipher. He's been giving nothing to tether back to. He's like, why should I care about this guy? I don't have no idea what his deal is or where he came from or where he's going. It's like, why should I care about this character? Jim West, I can get. I see everything about him and can follow him. I mean, Artemis Gordon feels like his underwritten sidekick, which is definitely not in keeping with the show at all. I was pissed off. It's like, I want to know more about Artemis Gordon. Why is he so technologically obsessed? Where did that come from? What's his deal? I mean, we get hints of he has an interest in women with the whole Selma Hayek thing, which one of you two is going to go riff on. But it's like, I have nothing to hook on as far as what he feels about any particular situation, except for one thing. We know he doesn't like to fire guns. That's the only thing we really know as a character about him. And he likes technological gadgets. It's like, that's not a character. Why should I care about this guy?
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Mm-hmm. And it's just sort of like the criminal underutilization of Kevin Kline, who is an amazing actor.
Even an amazing comedic actor. And I think he's trying to play the straight man here against Will Smith's more sort of goofy figure.
Cowboy.
Yeah, he's playing like, they're supposed to be kind of Abbott and Costello-y, right? It is weird that we don't get anything about Artemis Gordon other than the actions that he does. We don't really get his backstory of like who he is supposed to be, which I think is just unfortunate because it would be a nice addition. It would help explain both the differences between Jim West and Artemis Gordon, but also explain like where Artemis Gordon is coming from and why is he serving the country in his way, because he's I think in a way more dedicated than Jim West is.
I mean, he's willing to, in the course of this movie, break into the White House and impersonate USS Grant in order to lay a verbal beatdown on Jim West. Why? What prompts him to go to that lengths? Because that's a great way for you to wind up getting thrown into jail for a while, even if you're a confidant of the president or not. It's like, but why would it be driven to do something as crazy and strange as that? Why?
It certainly suggests that Ulysses S. Grant is a very, very lenient commander-in-chief.
He is very un-Grant-like.
He is like completely going against anything I know about the character as a general or a president. Like,
I spent half this movie just thinking that Kevin Kline was playing Ulysses S. Grant in every version of the Ulysses S. Grant we see.
Actually, he is.
Oh my god, he is? Really?
Did you not see the credits? Yes, he plays Ulysses S. Grant.
Mm-hmm.
Did you not see
it's
that?
It's amazing.
He plays Ulysses S. Grant as well as Artemis Gordon.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I said Kevin Kline's a fucking amazing actor.
Disappears. He just disappears into his role.
Yeah.
Oh, Christ.
Like, I feel like the only, Will Smith had some red meat and, Kenneth Branagh just had a good fucking time because Kenneth Branagh just comes anywhere to have a good fucking time. Yeah, everyone else was just, like, criminally underutilized by this film. But, I mean, that leads into another massive hate-worthy weakness of this movie, which I will jump in and talk about, because I will reserve the right, if Sean does not sufficiently bring up the fact that it is one big, horrible, gross, gay, trans, and disability joke. We'll talk about...
Well, the disability joke is my dislike.
Well, we're gonna just talk about the women.
We can tag team it. Can we tag team it?
That works. So, first off, this movie does the classic Western issue where the only way women apparently ever existed in the Old West was as whores.
Yeah.
Which I'm so fucking tired. Like, I actually really fucking love Westerns as a genre. You know, there's a reason I wrote a space Western. But that is, like, there are so many problematic tropes that come with Westerns, and the whole fact that women only exist so that you can put them in, like, a corset and heels and fishnets is just, like, vomit worthy. Because, you know, women hadn't been invented as anything other than sex objects. And then what this movie does is that, you know, it actually has a fairly decent number of women who occasionally get to say things, but all of them are basically there to be a sex object that is attached to one of the male characters and there for the audience to gaze upon. Even Rita, like, she's just there to let the guys be like, hi, we're a giant gay joke, but now we're both gonna, like, hit on the hot lady so you can tell we're not really queers, haha. And, you know, and then at the end, her entire function was to be like, oh, I manipulated you so that I could get my husband, because that's all that matters. And then, you know, you've got the women that surround Loveless, who are kind of like his little villain gang, and they're basically just there to be like his Playboy bunnies.
Yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so frustrating. And it's just, I can't say that necessarily were this movie made today, it would be any better in that regard, because there is plenty of, like, misogyny and lack of women, but I'm just fucking tired of it. Like, it's not cute now, and it wasn't cute in the 90s. The fact that Rita's entire role is basically just there to be as a foil for the gay joke just makes it that much worse. And I hate it, and I rolled my eyes so hard constantly.
It's frustrating because Salma Hayek plays this character, and Salma Hayek has a number of moments in her career where she's basically there to be very crude about it, to be tits and ass, which I find very frustrating because this is the same actress who played Frida Kahlo very, very effectively and is an exceptional actress. Yes, is she beautiful? Absolutely. Salma Hayek is absolutely gorgeous. She's a beautiful woman, but also she's an incredible actress. And it frustrates me that so much of her early career, especially in the 90s and the early 2000s, is really just playing up the fact that she happens to have boobs and is an attractive woman, and not the fact that she's just a really good actress. It's sort of like an abuse of her in a way. It's super frustrating because Salma Hayek could actually be a really cool role in this movie. She could have so much to do here. Like, maybe the story is not Jim Weston and Artemis Gordon getting together and this is their origin story, but rather they're two people who've been working together for years, and Salma Hayek is the new person who's sort of come in, and maybe she doesn't stay for the whole time, but she becomes their partner for this movie, and it becomes less about, oh my gosh, Salma Hayek has boobs and they're amazing, but more about, like, Salma Hayek's actually really fucking good at what she does, and let's have her be, like, maybe she is, as others were suggesting, like she's part of the Mexican Secret Service or FBI or whatever the Mexican version of that is, and they work together to defeat Loveless. That would be so cool to have that.
To give an example of a more recent movie that does it better, is that the Man from U.N.C.L.E. movie has Alicia Vikander as the third character to Henry Cavill and what's his name, and Armie Hammer, and she actually does stuff and is a character with plot and depth and goals. It's like, hey, this is how you really do it. I mean, Salma Hayek is just, I lament that her character was so wasted. I also lament for a second that I thought maybe the movie was actually going to do something with it, and nope, not going to do it. Can't actually give a female character autonomy and something to do for her own. No, we can't have that in the 90s. No, sir.
And I mean, that's not even touching on the fact that, say, like, the women around Loveless, why are they there? Who fucking knows?
They're you mentioned them as Playboy bunnies, and they are, and they all kind of all thematic. I mean, you had Munitia. And you had Bailing as this Asian person, like
Miss Lippenreader?
Miss Lippenreader, yes. Miss Lippenreader is like, what the hell is that?
Yeah.
It's like, but she actually does it. She actually does it, but it's like, what the? Come on. That's really what the best you have?
At least they're kind of competent. Like, they do kind of do the thing they're there for.
Because they're taking notes when the tank is firing things and trying to make better things. So they're actually kind of good at what they do, but still, they're just jokes.
And while they're there to be pretty too, they at least sometimes do things that are useful.
Well, I mean, God, like, Rita at one point is the reason they get cancer, because she panics and grabs the pool ball that's got the sleeping gas in it.
Yeah.
Right, and he knocks them out. It's like,
and Kevin Kline's like, please stop, Rita, please stop, Rita. And you're just sitting there going, this is going to happen. Like, just let it happen, dude. You know it's going to happen. Let's just let it get it over with.
Ugh. So
I will say that even though the physics of it make absolutely no sense, the fact that they have those weird magnetic, like, collars that, like, call the spinny blade
spinning blades. Yeah, that is so steampunky, weird, and impractical. I was charmed by that, even if it breaks all the laws of physics as we know it. Especially when they reverse the polarities.
We don't need physics in steampunk. It's fine. That's the genre is not there for actual physics. And I will fight anyone who claims it is.
I have a PhD in English. I have not taken a science class in at least 10 years. And even I am sitting there going, this doesn't make any sense. Well, how does this work?
This is not how this works.
How does this work? You shoot the blade out of a big metal machine, and it chases the people with the smaller magnetic collars. Why? How does that work? This makes no sense. I don't know how Alex feels, so I will throw that to Alex because I'm very curious how you felt about the physics of this film.
Sean, we've been friends for how many years now?
At least 6.
Have I ever, in our entire friendship, other than my rant about how much I hate the Total Recall remake because of the elevator through the center of the earth, but we'll set that aside for now. Have I ever given a shit about unrealistic physics?
I feel like in the core you had issues.
Well, that wasn't physics. That was mostly like rocks don't fucking work that way. But, like, you know, I'm not like some little, oh, I have an engineering degree wank fest about, like, well, I can, do orbital mechanics, and so all of my spaceships are, like, I don't give a shit about that. Just tell me a story.
You're not Neil deGrasse Tyson, is what you're saying.
No. I have never been, like, there is actually, I mean... There have occasionally been questions about, like, the physics in my steampunk doesn't make sense on purpose. And there have been questions about, like, well, where do they get their food? And I'm like, it doesn't fucking matter because it's steampunk.
Yeah. Fair enough, Alex.
Like, I'm not here to write a realistic world that could function without me watching it at all times. I'm just like, what is going to aesthetically work to build the story I want? And in that sense, Wild Wild West as a film actually aesthetically works because it makes no goddamn sense, and it doesn't have to because it's steampunk. Like, put down your slide rulers, everyone. Take a deep breath. I know that you're super proud of the fact that you, like, got an A in your Newtonian mechanics class, but I don't care.
Yeah, the giant spider city thing, cannot work in any sort of realistic physics. I didn't care about that.
Yeah, like, all I want is rule of cool physics, and going back to the core, the reason that doesn't work is because it wasn't cool. It was dumb.
Totally
fair. It was
fair.
just dumb.
Whereas this shit was cool.
Okay, so I guess we need to end this by having me do my dislike finally, because we've got a lot to say about this movie, and we're having a lot of fun. So this is good times. But my dislike has to do with the disability aspect, which Alex had mentioned earlier, which is obviously going to do with Loveless, if you've ever seen this film, because Loveless is a person with a disability who is... So I will preface this by saying that I don't fully understand a lot of disability issues, but I still found this very deeply bothersome and in a lot of ways very offensive, because so much of Loveless's character, his evilness is tied to his disability, which I found deeply frustrating because it seemed to me that just making him eccentric and weird and also super racist and wanting to be sort of, I guess, like a dictator in his own sort of weird way and sort of authoritarian and evil, that seemed to me to be good enough for me to find him to be a compelling villain. But the fact that so much of this story is about how his disability is part of what makes him villainous, and also part of what makes him, and I'm using this with huge quotation marks on it, sexually deviant, because this film at multiple points has Loveless essentially present his sexual interests, which are presented as heterosexual, as being deviant and weird, and I'm putting quotation marks here in those again, because there is a point in which Rita is implicated as needing to be put into some kind of machine, and then Loveless at a later point suggests that he has the technical prowess to create the ability for him to have pleasure. We're never shown this, thank God, but the implication is that he is abusing women, Rita being the primary one shown in the film, and so he's presented as being sexually deviant and being abusive and horrible, and that's all attached to his disability, which I find frustrating primarily because he is... this story could very well be about a man who happens to have a disability who also is an evil racist. And you could have... I mean, this is taking place after the Civil War, and while I'm not an expert on the Civil War, I have to assume there were people with disabilities on both sides after the war, because both people are being shot and blown up, and that means that people are losing limbs, etc. And so it seemed to me that maybe we could have had, if we wanted Loveless to be evil while also having a disability, we would compare that to maybe these moments of Ulysses S. Grant, like maybe where some of his like little public moments, he also has disabled soldiers there. I don't know. What I'm really getting at is that I just feel like Loveless, so much of what makes him evil is not that he's a racist and a former Confederate, which to me seems to be fine, but more that he is disabled. And I find that incredibly frustrating because I think you could tell this story and have the disabled person also be the villain without the villainy being tied into his disability. And the easy solution to that to me seems to be have the good guys also have some people with disabilities so that you see different flavors, as it were. It's a weird phrasing, but I've had a few to drink. But different versions of people, like, look, disabled people can be evil too. Any group of people, there are evil gay people, there are evil hetero people, there's a lot more evil hetero people, but like any group of people.
Because there's more of you.
Yeah, but you get the idea, right? Like any group of people, there are going to be total fucking assholes in any group of people. That just happens.
So I think the thing you're also kind of missing out on in this rant that I just want to add as a detail, if you have not watched this movie, is it's not just that Loveless is the disabled guy who's evil and the main villain. Every man in his crew is also disabled in some way and has had that disability like compensated for or assisted with a device invented by Loveless. But for example, Bloodbath McGrath is missing his ear and he's got like a little device that replaces it. And it is explicitly depicted in the movie as a disgusting thing.
Right.
Yep.
For Loveless, it's, it's an emasculating thing that is... The movie is really weirdly obsessed with his sex life.
Yes.
So it's not just that Loveless himself is a disabled man who is a villain. It is all of the men in the group of bad guys. Every single fucking one of them, down to the guy who is just like, doesn't even have any lines. All of them are disabled in some way. None of the good guys are. So then all the evil crew is just entirely like disabled men and Playboy bunnies.
Right, like Coleman, for example. I mean, there's nothing that Coleman does in the movie that he couldn't have been a disabled character, and that would help balance the scales as far as that and show, like, yeah, as Alex pointed out, yeah, all it is, yeah, the evil side is disabled people and Playboy bunnies, and it is a really, really bad way to line up Team Evil. Whereas you could make Coleman disabled because he just runs the train and does nothing else really, and then it reveals at the end he's a U.S. Marshal. I mean, if he did that, maybe he's missing an arm or something, and then you take away that whole disabled equals evil equation that the movie makers may not even be explicitly aware they're making, but they're making it all the same.
I mean, I will have to say, like, the one thing that I found intensely amusing in a horrible way was the one line Loveless has about how when he's stealing the good guy's train, it's really nice, but it's not accessible. And so like
wheelchair accessible,
so much of
yes.
his inventions are about like making things wheelchair accessible and all that. And I was like, oh, like in a weird way, I really like that. Just one little piece.
It is very the 90s, as you said before. It's just the 90s, and it's just bullshit, and I am like with you. I'm kind of tired of it, and it makes me really sad because this film could be just like a stupid, dumbass film and could be a lot of fun, but then it just throws all of this stuff in that I just find frustrating.
I mean, the one thing that just struck me over and over when I was watching this is like, you know, obviously I was a teenager in the 90s. I graduated from high school in 1998 when I was 17. And this movie just took me back to the 90s and reminded me how much I fucking hated the 90s. And it wasn't just because I hated a lot of the music in the 90s that wasn't metal, which is what I mostly think about now when I think about the 90s. It reminds me that, oh, the 90s were the reason that I didn't figure out I was bisexual for like another 8 years because everything was so fucking homophobic. And the 90s were the reason that it took me this long, you know, to figure out that I'm a trans person, because when I grew up in the 90s, it was so fucking transphobic when we even admitted that trans people existed at all. And the 90s were also so fucking horrific towards people with disabilities, which I'm sure it was even worse earlier when I was not as cognizant of what was going on. But I remember growing up and hearing all the jokes about people with disabilities and it just being like a socially acceptable thing that I have spent many years trying to train myself out of. So like, yeah, it was just kind of like a little time capsule for like, hey, remember how socially shitty things were, you know, when you were a teenager? And I was like, oh yeah, it was bad.
You and me
really
both.
Fucking bad.
Because I graduated in 2001, and there are things I love about the 90s, but there's so much of the culture of the 90s that it's just so toxic. Like, I think back, like, when I was a teenager, like, if you were a dude, especially a white dude, and you were not, at least you didn't think of yourself as gay at that point, or you didn't want anybody to think yourself as gay, like, you ran around, like, calling other people gay as a way to knock other people down. Like, I did that as a teenager. And when I think back to it, I'm like, holy shit, the fucking horrible stuff I did to people. Like, I wasn't as bad as some, but I was still, like, contributing to a culture that treated people who were gay or trans or other variations of identity as lesser than, because I wanted to prop myself up as, like, look, I'm hetero, and so I'm totally fine, because I didn't want all of the other big boys to think that I was homosexual. And it, in the 90s, was littered with that. Any teenager who, like, any kid who grew up in the 90s and like, became a teenager in the 90s remembers it. Alex, you remember it. I remember it so much. And it, like, fills me with horror. Because there's so much shit that we did to one another to, like, prop ourselves up as being better. And I don't want to toot my horn, but I'm glad I've changed.
Like, you know, just as a reminder, like, you know, kind of where we were at then, 4 months after I graduated was when Matthew Shepard got murdered. And they tried the gay panic offense. Like, yeah. So when this movie is like one giant fucking gay joke about like, oh, haha, we're not really gay. Like, oof.
I mean, this was the era of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This was the...
Mm-hmm. I mean, I feel like I kind of wonder if some of the 90s, like the absolute, you know, incessant social homophobia that gets reflected like in this movie was honestly because of the AIDS epidemic, because AIDS made it impossible for people to pretend that gay people didn't exist anymore.
Well, I was letting the two of you talk, but yes. So in the 80s, where I grew up as a teenager, yes, I mean, the AIDS epidemic kind of made gay people impossible to ignore as people. I mean, It's like, I remember in the 70s, early age, you didn't talk about gay people existing, or if it's like hushed whispers, but the AIDS epidemic kind of brought people out of the closet unwillingly, and suddenly people showing up and trying to present and fight for their rights. And then the 90s was basically a very massive backlash against gay people trying to assert their humanity. So it was definitely a pendulum swing backward, and a very, very negative one. And the AIDS epidemic is very much tied with that narrative.
And you would have had a slightly different experience, Paul, because you're certainly a little bit older than me, and a little bit older.
I graduated in '89, so yes.
I mean, you're our token Gen X.
Yes, I am. I'm the token Gen X of the podcast. So
okay, let's do final thoughts and a grade.
You got the shot.
It's up to you.
Deep breaths. You got it.
Cleansing breath.
Yep, and I'm throwing it to Paul. Paul, your final thoughts and a grade.
Homophobia, the sexism, the lack of a character for Artemis Gordon, the female characters as Playboy bunnies or worse. I watched this movie yesterday, and I could have watched it again today, and I thought, no, I really don't want to. I really just can't stomach watching this again. And so a movie like that winds up only one of several grades, all low. So I am going to give this a solid D-, because I couldn't rouse myself to watch this again. Even if it glorifies in its steampunk goodness at many moments, I just could not rouse myself to watch this movie again. So D-.
Totally fair grade, Paul. What about you, Alex?
So there were actually a few things in this movie that I enjoyed. You know, Kenneth Branagh chewing on the scenery is always good in my book. I love stupid bullshit steampunk stuff. Like, aesthetically, it was really great. I mean...
Listeners, you should read Alex's steampunk stuff.
Oh, yes, you should definitely read my steampunk stuff. The physics is also terrible in those books.
Yeah, but you don't care. You were more interested in Captain Ramos than in the physics.
Exactly.
And there's also zombies!
If you're thinking about the physics when you're reading my books, I have not done my job properly. Anyway, unfortunately, any joy that I took from this movie was completely destroyed because it was like being on a bad trip back to the 90s. And let me tell you guys, I am never going to be, or let me tell y'all, I am never going to be one of those people that's like, oh, high school was so great. I wish I was back in my glory days. No, I was so thrilled to shake the fucking dust of the 90s off my shoes and get the fuck out of there. So, I mean, that alone, just all of the baggage of the 90s in one movie that really wasn't that great. I'm with Paul. It's a D-.
I think that's totally fair. You and I are on very similar boats. I'd like to be young again, but I would not want to be in the 90s.
I mean, if we're talking young again in the sense that my knees wouldn't hurt all the time, but I would hopefully still have a fully developed brain so I could understand risk, I could go for that.
Yeah. I think that's what I'm going for. All right, well, my final thoughts are pretty simple. There's a lot that I find really just fun because this film is, as everyone has said, just really silly and just lays into it. Like, I love the idea of a giant spider machine. That's just a lot of fun to me. And it's kind of cool to see. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense, but it's just fun to watch. But I agree with Alex that there's just a lot of things in this that they just don't... They represent the time in a way that doesn't transcend that time. Like, there are some films where, like, I can look at it like, oh, it's from that period, and, like, there are things about it that don't work, but the rest of it kind of works, so it's fine. This film doesn't really quite escape that, and I think that's really the reason why I have to also give it a D-. I don't hate this film with a fiery passion. There are films we've watched that I think are just absolute garbage. I think there's a lot about this film that's just a lot of fun. Kenneth Branagh, we're both in agreement, Alex, that Kenneth Branagh is absolutely stellar in this, and he's a lot of fun to watch. But it is a film that it's too much of its time. I can't let that go. It's not something that I find redeemable. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
That makes my math easy.
D-.
D-. Wow, did you not even think about that one?
So, as always...
Don't watch this movie.
Watch it at your own peril.
Yeah. If you want to feel sad, watch it.
Yeah, watch it at your own peril. This is not one of the 90s Will Smith movies I would rewatch. I would just go to Men in Black.
Yeah.
Or Independence Day. One of those. At least in Independence Day, you can have the brief moment where you hope that Harry Connick Jr. and Will Smith become gay lovers.
It will live forever in my heart.
There's a moment where I think it might happen. It doesn't because it's the 90s, but that's okay because I kind of like them together and I wish he didn't die so soon in the damn movie. Anyway, so you can find out all about us at skiffyandfanty.com, at skiffyandfanty on the Twitters. We're at facebook.com/skiffyandfanty. You can find us on the Patreon at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty if you'd like to support us. We have a newsletter, skiffyandfanty.com/newsletter. So all of that is going on. And so thank you for listening. And thank you, Paul and Alex, for being my co-hosts, my ninjas, my awesome steampunk friendos.
You're welcome, citizen. You're welcome.
Stay frosty.
And on that note, awkward ending and scene. If you would like to support this podcast, you can do so at patreon.com/skiffyandfanty. You can also find us on our website, skiffyandfanty.com, and on Twitter at skiffyandfanty. If you'd like to send us an email, you can do so at skiffyandfanty@gmail.com. The music for this episode comes from Sphere by Creo. You can find out more about their music at freemusicarchive.org.